Hey everyone, as promised, since today is another digital day, we are going to walk through how I would get started on putting together my rough draft for my speech analysis essay or my rhetorical analysis essay. Now, as you can see here, I'm in my Google Drive, and this is where I'm going to start by opening up a new Google Docs. Now, this is obviously going to look slightly different because I'm doing this on my laptop at home, where yours is going to be an iPad screen, but it should be a similar process here. So I'm actually going to go into my English 10 folder, my Brit-Lit subfolder. I've got a lot of subfolders, as you can tell. And I'm going to go into my Unit 5 Rhetoric folder, or wherever I need to save this, and I'm going to create a new Google Docs. And this Google Docs is what we're going to be working with today. So I'm going to change my title right away to Rhetorical Analysis Essay, Rough Draft, and I'm going to go from there. To get started, I'm going to need to put in my header, my MLA formatted header. So I'm going to start with my name. Then I'm going to put in my teacher's name. Then I'm going to put in the class. And finally, the date that this is due. Now, since this is just my rough draft, I'm going to be putting in the rough draft due date, and I will then change that for when I have my final draft ready to go and turn in. So I'll change that date to be my final draft due date after I'm done making edits to my rough draft for my final draft. Now, this simply isn't enough. I need to go through and I need to format this correctly because this looks sort of right, but not entirely right. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to highlight this. I'm going to change this to Times New Roman, size 12. Double-spaced. I'm the kind of person, though, who, moving forward, before I start a rough draft, I like to have all of my thoughts mapped out into some sort of an outline. Now, you can do this in a written manner, you can do this in a typed manner, you don't need to do this at all, but this is how I like to organize my thoughts, and it really helps, especially with something like this sort of essay that needs to be really structured. And now I can do one of two things. I can either start my rough draft right away, or I can do my outline. Today, for my purposes, just to walk you through this without having to type a draft, I'm going to show you how I would outline this before I would turn this into a rough draft. Okay? So the first thing that I want to start with in my outline is going to be the introduction. And your introduction is going to include 3 key components. Hopefully this is super review for you guys after doing your practice writing ACT test, after doing a practice writing test last spring instead of your MCAs. This should all be old hat, this should be very familiar to you, but we start every introduction with an attention getter of some sort. We then follow that up with our thesis statement, and then round out our introduction with our preview of main points. That doesn't mean that you are only going to have 3 sentences in your introduction. You guys are sophomores now, you're adding complexity to your writing, you're becoming more advanced with how you organize and present your thoughts. That's just the baseline of the bare minimum of things that you need to include. Your attention getter shouldn't just be a quote that is unconnected to everything and then you just launch into your thesis statement. You're going to want to bridge that gap for your reader. You're going to want to connect that in some manner. So me creating this outline is just a baseline of me knowing what I need to include, and then I'm going to fill in the meat onto the bones, so to speak, as I begin to write my rough draft. Now, my first main point, if I'm organizing my essay, and the purpose of our essay, remember, is to analyze a speech for its ethos, pathos, and logos, how it brings together those 3 pillars of rhetoric to create a really persuasive and interesting argument, okay? And so what I want to do is not only have a main point for each of those 3 things, but I might want to expand my writing and give my readers some context on this speech before I even launch into my analysis. And also to help avoid myself falling into a summary instead of an analysis. Remember, when we're writing these essays, I want you to be telling me why these things matter. Don't just tell me about the speech. I've read these speeches. I picked them for you for a reason, right? Tell me why they're important through the ethos, pathos, and logos. If you just really can't help yourself from summarizing or giving some context to the speech, if you really feel that this will bring your essay all together, that's totally fine. Make sure you just do that in one paragraph, though, before you move on into your analysis. So maybe if I'm that kind of person, I really need to be heard about what this speech is about, my main point 1 is going to be an overview. And this is going to be giving my audience some context. So this would be the who, what, where, when, why. Okay? And actually, this why is also going to segue very nicely into the ethos, pathos, and logos of my speech coming up. So that might be my entire main point one, is giving my audience a little bit of understanding who gave this speech, where they were, what time was it, what year was it, what was going on around this speech, why did they need to give this speech, before I then get into the why was the speech effective, okay? So then I'm going to move into my next main point. And as you guessed it, this is where I'm going to start getting into my analysis of ethos, pathos, and logos. Now, in order for me to know where to file what, I'm going to want to refer back to my print copy of the text that I received in class the other day. Hopefully, you've read through your print copy, you've read through the text of the speech already, and you've made annotations that look something like this. Now, this is just my example. Everything about my example is going to come back to this JFK inaugural address speech, because nobody in our classes picked this. So you'll see, and I can post this for you on Schoology as well, this example of how I would annotate this. Apparently I only had one color of highlighter at the time. Those of you who are really on the ball will have 3 different colored highlighters, one for ethos, one for pathos, and one for logos. I only have one, so you'll notice that I had to include my titles here. Now, you probably did this anyway to keep yourself organized, but in any case, here's mine. I looked at this very first paragraph of his speech and automatically saw words like freedom and the Almighty God and a solemn oath. And I was like, wow, JFK is really building pathos and he's really building ethos here, right? When you're talking about patriotic things, if any of your speakers refer back to the patriotism that comes with being a member of whatever country that they're from, in this case, America, so we are all about freedom in America. That is a unification, trying to get all of his citizens to feel unified in a celebration of freedom. And a lot of presidents do this. So if you have a speech written by a president, pathos is probably going to be shown for you most often in that sense of pride. Okay? The pride also connects to the speaker's ethos. In my case, the speaker was being sworn in as president. He had just been voted the President of the United States of America. That is a brand new title. He is swearing an oath before his citizens, before his family, his friends, and before God. And so a lot of times when speakers bring in not only their title, like president, but they'll also bring in references to God or the Bible. That's also an appeal to ethos. So hopefully you notice those sorts of things in your speech as well. So this is the way that I would go about annotating my speech. And remember, I'm going to want to hand in this exact annotation with my final draft when that is due on final draft due date. Okay, so make sure that you have gone through and done this before you start writing anything on your final or rough draft. So make sure that you have your annotations taken care of. If you have any questions about the annotations, please let me know. If you're struggling with what you need to pay attention or mark up, or if you're the opposite of what this looks like right now, and your page is entirely pink because you think everything's important, that's also the extreme, the opposite direction. Let me know and I can help you work through what actually is important in your speech. But this is why we did our practice leading up to this, right? This is why we looked at a couple other examples of speeches and practiced annotating them and picking out the important pieces of ethos, pathos, and logos before we wrote this. So once I make all of these things known, once I highlight and mark up my text throughout the entire thing, I'm going to go back to my outline or back to my rough draft if you're not an outline kind of person, and I'm going to decide what order I want to introduce these appeals in. So maybe I'm going to start with ethos. I'm going to go to main point 3, and I'm going to talk about pathos, and maybe my last main point 4, is going to be about logos. Under each of these things, if I'm making this outline under each of these things, I'm not just going to leave it at that. I'm going to refer back, I'm going to go back and forth between the text that I just marked up of my speech and this outliner, this rough draft, and I'm going to drop in quotes that I've selected that fit with each of these categories into my outline. I'm going to make this as simplistic and straightforward, as formulaic for myself as I can. So if this first one is ethos, maybe my first example of ethos is that when I just talked to you about how JFK was swearing an oath before the people and before God, okay? And I'm going to pull out that quote. So I'm going to put this in quotation marks, and here's what it's going to look like. So once I have this all plunked in here, now I can go on and explain why this is important. So remember, you're going to introduce your piece of evidence, you're going to include word for word in a quote my piece of evidence, and then you're going to explain why the piece of evidence matters or why it fits with the particular category I filed it under. So my next part, my B of main point 2, is going to be something about why this particular example fits with ethos. And remember, ethos is an appeal to credibility. So in my B here, I might want to talk about an appeal to religion, talking about God. I might want to talk to an appeal of the importance of an oath, swearing, giving a promise to not only God, but to the American people, to every citizen of America. And I might want to talk about how he also appeals to the foundation of our country by saying that this oath was written by the people who founded America. So he's not only appealing to God and to the citizens, but he's also saying, hey, this is important because our founding fathers created this oath and they allowed me to be here in this moment to serve you. Okay, that might be everything that I use to then fill in that paragraph for main point 2 about ethos. There are a ton of other examples. I don't want to just have a laundry list of examples for ethos. I want to pick out the cream of the crop, the best of the best, probably 1, 2, maybe 3 at tops examples of ethos. 3 is going to be almost overdoing it for a main body paragraph. So I'm going to want to keep this within reason, and the bulk of this paragraph is going to be me explaining why my example fits with ethos. Why JFK and how JFK was able to establish his ethos in his speech and be a super credible person as he was being sworn into the office of the presidency. I'm going to continue on now to do this, to plug in my examples for pathos and logos and figure out if I even know why they fit with pathos and logos, because that's going to be the bulk of my paper about this speech. And then that's going to really bring me home into a completed rough drafts. Remember, what I have typed out right here would not be what I'm actually turning in because this is just an outline. I would still need to fill this in to create an entire rough draft, which is going to be what we're working on before that deadline of April 16th. So you've got 6 more days to really complete a nice, hefty, rough draft, okay? So that's how I'm going to start to bring this together. Remember that your conclusion is going to be the inverse of your introduction, right? So as I structure my conclusion, it's going to look like this. I'm going to want to fill in a review of my main points, a restatement of my thesis, and some sort of closing statement to really leave my audience on some sort of note with this speech. What do I want them to take away from my understanding of the rhetoric surrounding this speech? And that's going to be my clincher. So as you get going today, and through the next several days working on a rough draft, please be asking me questions on this process and be viewing this kind of like we're filling in a formula that's going to lead us to our end conclusion. It's going to lead us to our solution here. We're piecing together bits and pieces of a puzzle as we start to pull examples from our text and explain what they mean to the context of the persuasive tactics and the rhetoric employed in each speech. So as you get going, please let me know if you've got any questions. Hopefully this was helpful to give you a nice start on organizing your thoughts with this paper. And don't forget that the rough draft is going to be due on April 16th. And we will have some work days when you guys return from this snow day. Hopefully we do not have any more snow this spring and we can just carry on the rest of our semester. With that said, have a wonderful rest of your day. Let me know if you've got any questions.